Before the Colosseum stood in the heart of Rome, a private artificial lake reflected the golden statues of a tyrant. I mean, how exactly did Roman engineers drain a massive basin and then stabilize all that soft waterlogged sediment to support 50,000 tons of solid stone? Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep, literally, into the hidden engineering and geological secrets that gave ancient Rome's most famous monument its iconic, undeniable shape. Everyone recognizes that broken, asymmetrical profile of the Colosseum today. It's honestly one of the most famous silhouettes in the entire world. And we kind of just accept this broken shape because, well, it's incredibly old, right? But have you ever stopped to wonder why exactly half of that majestic outer wall is completely missing while the other half stands there perfectly intact? It's definitely not a coincidence, and it wasn't just slow decay. To understand why it collapsed exactly the way it did, we actually have to look way past the gladiator battles and dig deep underground.
All right, moving on to Section 1, the tyrant's private lake.
To really understand this whole shebang, we have to travel all the way back to 64 AD. Right after a devastating fire swept through Rome, Emperor Nero claimed the newly cleared land for his own grandiose golden palace. And get this, it featured a massive private artificial lake right smack in the middle of the city center. It was the ultimate insult to the Roman citizens who were out there living in poverty. But following Nero's death, a new emperor named Vespasian came into power. He wanted to break entirely with the past, right? Just erase the memory of the tyrant altogether. So, in what was honestly a brilliant political masterclass, Vespasian completely drained Nero's luxurious private lake and built a massive public amphitheater right on top of it. He was literally giving the land back to the people. It was just a perfect piece of propaganda, replacing a symbol of elite greed with an arena that could hold 50,000 Roman citizens.
Which brings us to Section 2, engineering an impossible foundation.
Okay, so building a colossal stone arena on top of a muddy lake bed is a total engineering nightmare. I mean, just imagine trying to place a massive stack of rocks on a wet sponge. You kind of get an idea of the problem. But the Romans, they tackled it head on in 3 distinct steps. First up, they obviously couldn't just build right on the mud, so they dug down 26 feet beneath the surface to carve out the old lake bed. Step 2 was managing all that water. They built this incredibly complex system of underground channels and sewers just to reroute the rivers and streams that were flowing from the nearby hills away from the valley. Only once the water was completely diverted and the mud was fully excavated did they reach a point where they could actually finally start pouring their foundation. And that brings us to a crucial number, 12 meters. To stabilize this massive structure in what was, frankly, incredibly poor soil, they poured a giant ring-shaped concrete foundation that was an astonishing 12 meters thick. Think about that for a second. They used 2 layers of specialized ancient Roman concrete, creating this incredibly dense, solid, basically donut-shaped base deep in the earth. And then, all that dirt they originally excavated, they packed it right back around the outside to elevate the entire structure. So, thanks to these massive concrete substructures, the Romans were able to move astonishingly fast. They used a really clever modular system of arches, which allowed thousands of laborers and slaves to work on multiple levels simultaneously. Construction kicked off in 72 AD, and get this, the largest amphitheater in history was inaugurated by Vespasian's son, Titus, in 80 AD. That is just 8 breakneck years to build a structure that would go on to define an entire empire. Absolutely mind-blowing. Let's shift gears to Section 3, the waterlogged ticking time bomb.
All right, so here is where all that brilliant engineering actually hit a fatal flaw. Sure, they managed to build the Colosseum quickly and securely, but the land underneath it, it was fundamentally inconsistent. Because the whole thing sat right on the footprint of a drained valley, the north side of the arena rested perfectly on solid limestone bedrock. It's essentially nature's concrete, so it was highly stable. But the south side, that side sat entirely on the soft, spongy sediment of the old league bed. So you have a building sitting on half rock, half wet sponge. You can probably see where this is going. To make matters worse, consider the sheer, immense weight they were piling onto this uneven geology. The outer walls were built out of travertine, which is a really dense, heavy limestone quarried over in Tivoli. We're talking an estimated 240,000 cartloads of this heavy stone dragged to the site, stacking over 50,000 tons of it high into the sky. And here's the kicker. They didn't even use mortar. Instead, they used 300 tons of iron clamps to hold the stones together. But throughout the Middle Ages, scavengers actually dug those iron clamps out to melt down, leaving the walls severely weakened.
So picture this, 50,000 tons of heavy stone stacked on soft, waterlogged soil, stripped of its iron reinforcements. It was literally a ticking geological time bomb just waiting for a trigger.
And that takes us to Section 4, the Great Seismic Collapse. For centuries, the Colosseum stood firm. Even as the empire fell, the games ended, and the arena was totally abandoned and repurposed as housing. But the earth beneath it, it was shifting. The trigger finally arrived in September of 1349, when a catastrophic, highly violent earthquake struck the Italian peninsula. The seismic waves just ripped through the city of Rome, testing the ancient foundations of the amphitheater to their absolute physical limits. And here, right here, is where the geology of Nero's lake finally took its toll. The stable north side, which remember was anchored in solid bedrock, held firm against the shockwaves. But the spongy south side, the side resting on that old waterlogged lake bed, it basically acted like a liquid. The soft sediment actually amplified the seismic vibrations. The entire southern outer wall, already weakened and now shaking violently, catastrophically collapsed into a massive mountain of rubble right on the arena floor. In a matter of seconds, the perfect ring of the Colosseum was broken in half.
But wait, where did all that fallen stone go? Like, why don't we see a giant pile of rocks there today? Well, instead of clearing the rubble to rebuild the Colosseum, opportunistic popes and aristocratic families essentially viewed the collapsed southern half as a free, pre-cut DIY store. Seriously, they carted away the rubble by the load to build Renaissance Rome. So the missing half of the Colosseum literally lives on today as the foundations of St. Peter's Basilica, the Palazzo Venezia, the fortifications over the Tiber River, and the grand Palazzo Barberini. Finally, we arrive at Section 5, a monument shaped by water. The sheer irony of all this is that the very water Nero gathered for his private luxury, the exact same lake Vespasian drained to give the land back to the people, ultimately dictated how the Colosseum would break apart over a millennium later. Which leaves us with a fascinating final thought for this explainer. We revere the Colosseum's architectural perfection today, but would it still be the world's most recognizable, romantic, and iconic ruin if it were just a perfectly intact concrete oval? Is its legendary status actually the direct result of a spectacular, lopsided geological failure? It's just amazing to think that the shape we all recognize isn't simply the work of brilliant engineers, but the ghost of a tyrant's buried lake. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the history beneath your feet.